High in the Peruvian Andes, at an elevation of roughly 16,400 feet, biologists walk up to a sleeping bird at night with a flashlight. It's perched on a branch, feathers puffed out, beak pointed straight up, not moving at all. And when they check it with a thermometer, they can barely believe the reading. 37.9 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's not the air temperature, that's the bird's body temperature. The lowest body temperature ever recorded in a bird, or in any mammal that doesn't go through true winter hibernation. It was cold as a rock, one of the researchers later recalled. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was dead. The bird is called a black metal tail. It's a hummingbird, the very creature we've come to see as the definition of fragility. Tiny, weightless, seemingly woven out of light. But that same bird, come sunrise, will start shivering all over, warming up by roughly 1 degree a minute. And within a few minutes, it will take off again as if nothing happened. Every single night, it passes through a state indistinguishable from death. And every single morning, it comes back from it. Here's what we're going to figure out over the next half hour. How is a body built that can shut itself down almost to zero every night and restart at dawn? And why does this particular bird need to do that more than almost any other creature alive? What happens inside a hummingbird during the day that pushes it to such an extreme every single night? And the biggest question of all, is the hummingbird really the delicate, fragile creature popular belief makes it out to be? Or are we actually looking at one of the toughest organisms among all vertebrates, just wrapped in deceptively delicate packaging? The answers will unfold gradually, chapter by chapter. And what we just opened with turns out to be only the tip of a much stranger story. Before getting into how a hummingbird survives on the edge, it's worth understanding where the idea of its fragility came from in the first place, and why it's become so deeply embedded in our culture. A hummingbird isn't a single species. It's an entire family called Trochilidae, and a rich one. Roughly 360 species, every single one of them living only in the Americas, from southern Alaska down to Tierra del Fuego. The smallest, the Cuban bee hummingbird, weighs about 7/100ths of an ounce, less than a standard paperclip. And the largest, the giant hummingbird, found high in the Andes, weighs up to 0.8 of an ounce, and even that only makes it about the size of a small starling. That size is exactly what built the reputation we still live with today. A creature the size of a large insect, glinting with a metallic sheen in the sunlight, hovering in near silence, visually, that really does look like something delicate, almost unreal, like a piece of jewelry that came to life. Add to that the cultural image of the hummingbird as a symbol of lightness and gentleness across the mythology of numerous peoples throughout the Americas, and you get a stereotype that's stuck around. Small means weak, delicate means fragile. The problem is that this stereotype is built entirely on appearance, not on physiology. The moment you start looking at what's actually happening inside that tiny body every single second of its life, the picture flips so completely that fragile turns out to be about the least accurate word you could use to describe a hummingbird. To understand why, you have to look past the feathers and the beak entirely, straight to where the bird's real secret is hiding, in its heart, and in the pace at which that heart works. A resting human heart beats somewhere around 60 to 80 times a minute, while a resting hummingbird's heart already runs at 250 to 500 beats a minute, faster than any human heart, even at the peak of intense exercise. But the real numbers start once a hummingbird takes off and hovers in front of a flower, because at that point, its heart rate climbs to 1,200 beats a minute, and in some recorded cases, all the way up to 1,260. Among all birds on the planet, that's the fastest heart rate science has ever recorded. For that frantic pace to make any sense, The rest of the hummingbird's physiology has to keep up. A hovering bird's breathing rate climbs to roughly 250 breaths a minute. A hummingbird breathes faster than most animals can blink, and digestion runs at the same feverish speed. Since researchers who fed hummingbirds spiders found that the prey moved through the bird's digestive system in under 15 minutes, roughly 70 times faster than human digestion. By some estimates, a hummingbird's metabolism, scaled to body mass, runs about 77 times higher than an average human's. And that's without even counting the bursts that happen during flight itself. The only creature that can really compete on heart rate is the tiny Etruscan shrew, whose heart beats even faster at its peak, up to 1,500 times a minute. But the shrew hits that pace, scurrying around on the ground, hunting for food, while a hummingbird sustains a comparable rate while hovering motionless in midair and executing precise wing maneuvers at the same time. A completely different category of physical demand. This isn't exaggeration for the sake of an impressive number. It's a direct consequence of the physics behind the kind of flight a hummingbird performs. Hovering in place is the most energy-expensive form of locomotion in the animal world, because the bird can't rely on oncoming airflow to save energy the way a soaring eagle or a gliding albatross can. And it has to generate every ounce of lift purely through muscle power and constant wing beats, without a single second of rest while airborne. Compare that energy cost to a human body, and the gap becomes physically uncomfortable to think about. To match a hummingbird's metabolism relative to body weight, an adult human would have to eat dozens of times more calories in a single day than their body actually needs, an amount a healthy person simply couldn't eat or digest in 24 hours. A reasonable question follows. What kind of body can physically withstand that kind of strain without falling apart? The answer lies not just in the speed of its metabolism, but in the anatomy of the flight itself, because the hovering that demands such a frantic pace is built in hummingbirds completely differently than in any other bird on the planet. In the overwhelming majority of birds, a wing beat works on a simple principle. Push the wing down, and you get lift. Lift the wing back up, and you're basically just resetting it for the next stroke, with almost no benefit to the flight itself. That's exactly why an ordinary bird can't hover in place for more than a few seconds. It simply doesn't get enough efficiency out of half of every wing beat. In hummingbirds, that problem is solved in a radically different way, built into the shoulder joint. In most birds, the shoulder works almost like a hinge with a limited range of motion. But in a hummingbird, it's a flexible, nearly ball and socket joint that lets the wing rotate at the shoulder almost a full 180 degrees. That rotation flips the wing's leading edge forward on the downstroke and backward on the upstroke, which means the bird generates lift on both halves of the wing beat instead of just one. And the path the wingtip traces comes out as a distinctive figure 8 lying on its side. If you could watch the tip of a hummingbird's wing in slow motion, it would be drawing that exact shape over and over, dozens of times a second. The ability to generate lift on every phase of the motion, not just half of it, is exactly what lets a hummingbird hold itself perfectly still in midair for as long as it wants, fly backward, sideways, or briefly flip upside down in the tight space between branches. Out of roughly 10,000 living bird species, the hummingbird is the only one that has mastered this kind of flight at all. But that unique ability comes with a price, paid in grams of muscle. To sustain wing beats at that frequency and power, roughly 50 beats a second in ordinary flight, and in some species as high as 80, the bird's chest muscles have to take up a disproportionately large share of its body, up to 30% of total body mass, while in most other birds, that figure rarely tops 15. Almost a third of this tiny bird's body is pure engine. What you end up with is a body engineered around a single task, hovering with maximum efficiency. And that body runs so close to its limits that even the smallest interruption in its energy supply becomes a matter of life and death within a matter of hours. All day long, a hummingbird is walking a tightrope of energy, and the cost of that walk only becomes clear once darkness falls. At that level of metabolic intensity, a hummingbird's energy reserves last only a matter of hours. Most species can go without food for no more than a few hours before they start genuinely starving. That's exactly why a hummingbird spends its daylight hours in an almost non-stop chase for calories. A single bird weighing just a few grams can visit several hundred flowers in a day. And for some high-altitude species, simply making it to evening means visiting somewhere around 500 flowers in a single day. Nectar itself isn't nearly as concentrated a fuel source as it might seem. It's mostly sugar water, and to get enough energy out of it, the bird has to drink a volume that looks absurd relative to its own body weight. Up to 3 times its own body mass in nectar in a single day. On top of that, nectar alone isn't enough to sustain the bird nutritionally. Hummingbirds regularly hunt small insects and spiders to get protein that simply isn't present in sugar water. And the overall picture adds up to something close to round-the-clock work, where any gap longer than a few dozen minutes starts creating a real energy deficit. This is where the myth of the fragile hummingbird gets its first real crack. A truly fragile creature wouldn't survive more than a few days under these conditions, and an organism teetering on the edge of a hunger crash every half hour of daylight looks a lot more like an extreme endurance athlete than a delicate ornament. But the hardest test of all doesn't come during the day when there are flowers nearby. It comes at night, when there are none at all. And when the bird has to solve entirely on its own, a problem that almost no other vertebrate with a comparable metabolism could handle. How to make it through 8 to 10 hours of darkness without a single chance to eat, while running a metabolism built to burn fuel almost without stopping. The solution evolution came up with sounds so radical that the first researchers who encountered it mistook sleeping hummingbirds for dead ones. Every single night, not occasionally, not only in emergencies, but literally every night as a routine part of the daily cycle, a hummingbird enters a state called torpor, not ordinary bird sleep, but a controlled, reversible shutdown of its own metabolism, a daily mini hibernation compressed into a single night. The mechanics of this state are striking on their own. A heart that a few hours earlier was beating well over 1,000 times a minute slows down to 50, and in some species, even less. While body temperature, which sits at around 104 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, starts falling rapidly to match the surrounding air temperature, instead of being artificially maintained the way most warm-blooded animals maintain theirs, even in their sleep. Breathing becomes so infrequent that at times the bird appears to stop breathing altogether. And altogether, this state lets a hummingbird cut its daily energy expenditure by 90%, sometimes as much as 95%, switching off almost the entire frantic engine that ran all day, leaving only the bare minimum needed to keep the bird's cells from actually dying. That savings comes with a real downside. A hummingbird deep in torpor completely loses the ability to react to anything. It can't take off if a predator shows up, can't even flinch. And for hours at a stretch, the bird is a completely defenseless, motionless target sitting on a branch. It takes that risk because the alternative, guaranteed death from exhaustion by morning, is worse than the theoretical risk of an attack. That's the choice that makes torpor not a sign of weakness, but a calculated survival strategy. The hummingbird trades safety for energy, because without that trade, it simply wouldn't live to see the dawn. What we've just described is the standard, everyday version of torpor that nearly every hummingbird goes through to some degree every single night of its life, whether it lives in a tropical rainforest or somebody's backyard in North America. Now think back to that bird from the Peruvian highlands, because up there, in the thin, freezing air of the Andes, evolution pushed that exact same mechanism into something that looks less like a brief rest and more like a full-blown biological extreme. The high Andes of Peru are, by every reasonable measure, a place that should be uninhabitable for something the size of a hummingbird. Thin, oxygen-poor air at elevations up to 16,400 feet, nighttime temperatures that regularly drop below freezing, and the exact same unrelenting need to pull nectar from hundreds of flowers a day just to avoid starving. That's precisely the environment the black metaltail lives in, a species whose behavior researchers from the University of New Mexico documented and published in the scientific journal Biology Letters, with results striking enough that major science outlets around the world picked up the story. While other birds and mammals at that altitude burn enormous resources trying to artificially hold their body temperature steady through the freezing cold, the black metaltail does exactly the opposite. It lets its body cool down almost to match the surrounding air, shedding most of its daytime body heat and dropping from its usual 104 degrees Fahrenheit all the way down to 37.9 degrees. A record that, at the time the study was published, was the lowest body temperature ever recorded in a bird, or in any mammal that doesn't undergo true winter hibernation. According to the researchers, that kind of cooling lets the bird save up to 95% of the energy that would otherwise go entirely toward keeping its own body warm through a freezing night. Sitting in that state, the bird is outwardly indistinguishable from a dead one. Feathers fluffed for minimal insulation, beak pointed upward, completely motionless for hours on end. That total defenselessness in the dark for an entire night turns out to be exactly the price high-altitude hummingbirds are willing to pay over and over, because there simply isn't an alternative. At that altitude, in those temperatures, with that metabolism, staying awake through the night would mean certain death from exhaustion long before dawn. It's worth adding that the predator risk up there is actually lower than you might expect, since the high Andes are relatively poor in predators that hunt prey this small. And as one of the study's authors noted, for most predators, a bird this tiny simply isn't worth the effort in thin, freezing air. Then morning comes, and what happens next might be one of the most underrated marvels in the bird world. Sensing the first rays of sunlight and the rising temperature, the frozen bird starts shivering all over, warming its muscles through their own contractions, a process that raises its body temperature by roughly 1 degree a minute. Within a few minutes, a heart that a minute earlier was beating once a second spins back up to its usual frantic rhythm. The eyes open, and the bird that spent the entire night indistinguishable from a corpse takes off and heads out to find its first flower of the day, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. The very creature most of us associate with fragility and fleeting delicacy actually pulls off every single day something that would mean certain death for almost any other vertebrate of comparable size. Passing through a state within a few degrees of clinical death, and doing it not once in some extraordinary set of circumstances, but on a regular, predictable basis as part of a completely ordinary day. The image we opened this video with, a tiny, weightless, almost toy-like bird, may be the most misleading image in the entire bird world. A hummingbird carries a heart that beats faster than any other birds on the planet, a metabolism that would leave a human physically incapable of eating enough to keep up, and a wing built so far outside the normal rules of bird flight that out of 10,000 species, it's the only one that ever mastered this particular kind of flight. It teeters on the edge of starvation every few dozen minutes of daylight and voluntarily passes through a state indistinguishable from death every single night. And high-altitude species push that same ability to an absolute physiological limit, cooling their bodies down to temperatures that would mean the end for most warm-blooded creatures. What we've been trained to see as delicacy turns out, on closer inspection, to be endurance pushed to its absolute limit. A hummingbird isn't fragile. It's simply built so that its entire life runs right at the edge of what's physically possible. And that's exactly why its existence looks so spectacular to us. We see a flash of shimmering color hovering by a flower, and we miss the fact that we're looking at one of the most resilient organisms among all vertebrates on Earth. Which part of this surprised you more? The hummingbird's extreme daytime metabolism, or the fact that it teeters on the edge of death every single night just to make it to morning? Let us know in the comments whether you've ever spotted a hummingbird sitting completely motionless early in the morning. And if you're up for it, next time we'll look at how these same birds manage to cross hundreds of miles of open water during migration, running on exactly as much fuel as they managed to store up beforehand, with zero margin for error.